It's the 2nd of September, and welcome to PHDQs. Question 1 is from Thomas Ovinston. What do you believe are the qualities required to show the kind of leadership needed in a crisis? And do you believe the Prime Minister is less relatable than the First Minister? Well, Thomas, I hope you have a cup of tea with you just now, as this is a long answer. It actually has very little to do with qualities. One of the most potent and enduring myths in modern society is that leadership is reducible to the power of the leader. Such an approach misses a very obvious point. Leaders only achieve anything through their followers, and great man theories write the followers out of history. The best example I can think of is the reverence we all give to King Leonidas of Sparta. Now, he would have achieved nothing without the other 299 Spartans, and it reflects badly on us that we revere Leonidas so much, yet we don't know the names of any of the other 299 brave Spartans. Leaders are never just leaders. They're always leaders of a particular social group, a nation, a political party, a religion. The same is true of followers. And those on the inside of the group often can't understand why outsiders don't revere their leader. Those on the outside of the group are equally uncomprehending of how anyone could. Think Thatcher. Think Corbyn, think Sanders, think Johnson, think Trump. So leadership is a group process, and more specifically, it's the cultivation of a we relationship between leaders and followers. So leadership is not about what separates the leader from others, it's about what brings the leader together with group members and allows him or her to represent them. An effective leader is one who's seen to be one of us, to work for us, and to achieve the things that we value. So where does that leave Boris? Well, he's always wanted to become the Prime Minister, i.e. win the election, but I don't think he really wants to be the Prime Minister, i.e. do the day-to-day graft of leading the country. In the midst of the greatest crisis most of us have known in our lifetimes, we were in more need than ever of effective leadership to bring us together, to resolve uncertainty, and to guide us out of the pandemic. The Prime Minister and his government have not done well. The UK has one of the highest death rates in the world, and as the carnage has increased, so Boris Johnson's standing has decreased. Now, Boris Johnson's rise was as a populist, harnessing the resentment of those who are experiencing a sense of decline, of being voiceless, of being ignored. He successfully created a divisive narrative whereby the people were abandoned and betrayed by the liberal elite. He was equally effective in creating a narrative of himself as part of the people and not one of the elite, so he could help the former take back control. Now, some might say that a Billingdon Clubbertonian being anti-elite is absolutely ridiculous, and I would agree, but the populist people are not defined in class terms. It's more about nation and culture and above all style. The elite are those who ignore us and who sneer at us. Johnson's characterised them as the political class and Brussels. His brilliance lay in his performance as the non-political politician, not well prepared but chaotic, not carefully controlled but outrageous, not dignified but happy to appear a buffoon. Even the look, the crumpled suit, the tousled hair, everything his critics saw as gaffes and weaknesses actually served to affirm his anti-political agenda, and their outrage marginalised them rather than Johnson. None of this was accidental. Johnson's apparently dishevelled, disorganised and improvised buffoonery was in fact very carefully rehearsed. His brilliance did not come despite his blundering. His blundering was his brilliance. I don't think that Boris would even have become Tory leader, let alone Prime Minister, without Brexit looming in the background. Boris was perfectly placed to come in as Brexit was being handled disastrously. He was a chaotic and reactive leader for a chaotic and reactive time. His cabinet consists of those who stood against him as leader so he could keep them quiet, and those who have always supported him, all with a distinct lack of experience. Many competent Tory ministers who didn't oppose him in the contest but generally opposed him politically were cleansed for the cabinet and the party in favour of this current group of ministers of state. And regardless of your politics, the competent ones like Philip Hammond, David Gauke and Rory Stewart would have been needed now more than ever. But without COVID to deal with, I suspect Boris would be, at least in the eyes of those who voted for him, living up to his promises and his Churchillian self-image. But the performative politics of populism backfire by making one unrepresentative as the groups change. In the midst of a pandemic, when the widest possible compliance to restrictive measures is necessary, the nation and its communities must be unified and inclusive. So the divisive categories of populism are no longer tenable. Moreover, we needed competent governance to get us through, rather than insurgent incompetence to get our votes. In this global crisis, our blundering Prime Minister is no longer of the group or for the group, and certainly not achieving what the group needs. Nicola, well, what can I say? The contrast is night and day. Clarity of message delivered by the same voice day after day. Competent, assured, and during this pandemic at least trying to be non-political. Her rise to power was more gentle, and she was better prepared for it. She didn't seek power for the sake of power. She sought it for the good of her country, of her people, and lastly her party. And she has surrounded herself, largely, with competent people. She is serving the interests of all her followers effectively, whether that's her colleagues in government, party members and activists like myself, and all Scots citizens. Even increasing numbers of people who are anti-independence and anti-SNP are satisfied with her performance during these times. So to summarise, quality and qualities alone do not make the leader. Rather, it's the fit between those qualities and the groups they lead that make them effective. And the groups led between these two leaders are as different than night and day, as are the respective leaders. Boris no longer fits the needs of his group, but in contrast, Nicola still fits her group like a glove. Question 2, also from Thomas Peter Ovenston. How do you believe living in Peterhead changes your perspective of the crisis? From someone living in a, say, larger city in Scotland, or the central belt of Scotland, or indeed any other issues such as police centralisation or having no North East of Scotland emergency control centres. Well, I can only assume by the crisis you mean COVID-19, and I don't feel any more or less concerned about it than anyone else. I'm glad I live in Scotland rather than other parts of the UK, but UK policies still put me at risk, like the lack of airport border control for the first 3 months of the pandemic. And even now it's not great. One thing I am glad about is that I live in a town where I can still afford a decent house with a garden, so that a private outside space was available to me while still protecting my family for COVID. I read about some of the mental health problems people in tower blocks and not leaving their houses for months had. I was quite impressed with the community spirit shown in Peterhead, but I don't and have never lived in a big city, so I don't know if that is replicated elsewhere. With the centralisation of call centres, there were teething troubles initially, but in my recent experience I've been able to get any assistance I've ever needed. In some ways it's been very convenient, and even during lockdown I had an appointment with a doctor in Aberdeen over Skype, so there's no need to go to Aberdeen, etc. The one thing it has taught me is that this disease is insidious. I'm not going to go into details, but even after months of being uber careful, we had a brush with it where one of my wife's colleagues had to self-isolate. However isolated we feel and however careful we are, it can reach us anywhere. Question 3 is from my old friend Mark McGruther. This is a chart of oil revenues collected from UK oil and gas. The difference between 2013 and 2015 is about £8 billion. Why? Well, Mark, as you know, the Scottish Government has to keep a detailed and balanced budget, but our Westminster chums, less so. I've done a bit of digging, and while I can't nail down precise published figures, it goes kind of like this. UK oil and gas revenues consist of two things. Offshore corporation tax, which is the same as any corporation tax, and a petroleum revenue tax, which is a per barrel extracted tax. The reason for the drop in revenues is as follows. A new oil company, even one taking over a mature field, can claim tax relief on any first-year capital expenditure in their first year of operating a field. And as you know, a lot of new players are entering the game. As the oil price dropped, it was going to become uneconomic to extract UK oil. So petroleum revenue tax was lowered and eventually set at zero. So any revenues collected at the moment are purely offshore corporation tax. Any oil company capital expenditure can be offset against their oil revenues as tax relief. So CapEx related to decommissioning, sponsoring green energy projects, etc. will also be deducted for a tax bill and can even be refunded from historic revenue payments. The period between 2013 and 2015 saw a drop in production, a rise in new players, and a lot of decommissioning and green energy projects kicked off, hence the sharp drop off in revenues. As these new players have entered their second and third years in our market, we've seen the corporation tax start to trickle in, but the petroleum revenue tax is still set at zero. So it's nowhere near where it has been in the past, or where it could and should be. In 2018, Norwegian oil sales were worth $48.5 billion, and they collected revenues of $25.4 billion. That's 55% of the total. UK oil sales were worth $43.3 billion, yet they collected revenues of $1.4 billion. That's 3% of the total. So just as the UK government made a balls of it on their way into the oil game, they're making an even bigger balls of it on the way out too. The Norwegian figures also debunk the myth that businesses are not attracted to and can't thrive in high-tax economies. So in summary, Mark, it's incompetence rather than an elaborate scam. And to be honest, I'm not sure which is worse. At least in an elaborate scam would show that the Westminster government is at least good at something, even if it's cheating. Well, that's it for PHDQs this week. I'd direct the watching public to comment on the Facebook page. Remain civil at all times. Davey PhD.